Video games were straight-washed for a long time, which is why we're used to seeing macho characters on our screens. But now, things have dramatically changed. We see an increased representation of different sexualities in our games, and honestly, it's made them a lot more fun. In today's video, we'll be talking about how characters who seem like they've just stepped out of a drag show are actually helping society. So let's get started. First up, the audience for video games is larger than ever, so increased representation is a must. Of course, we don't live in a world anymore where video games are only played by teens or young adults living in their parents' basement. Well, yeah, we get it. This was a huge stereotype, but honestly, it's all we think of when we hear video gamers. Probably because this was largely how the crowd was portrayed in the early days of the gaming craze. But now, things are very, very different. Almost everyone has been exposed to the world of video games. You might have a favorite video game upon which you can just spend hours and hours. There's only one explanation for this. Games are becoming more inclusive. When people see a character like them on the screen, they're more inclined to play it. And as the inclusivity and representation increase, the market for video games also increases, leading to very happy customers. Now, it's important that the queer community gets enough representation in the world of video games. Recent research has shown that more than 20% of the people employed by the gaming industry identify themselves as part of the LGBTQ+ community. Now, this is a pretty big number, which makes it all the more important for the industry to cater to their needs and make sure they feel welcomed. Now, we all know that the non-heterosexual folks have only recently been getting an increased amount of representation, with the widespread homophobia around the world. But alas, their time to shine has come. Literally. Clearly, the industry isn't solely for white straight men anymore. Things are slowly moving forward. The early 2000s and the 90s kids might remember that finding decent female representation in video games was really hard. Now, we won't pretend to know what was going on in the sexist mind of the creators back then, but looking at the characters now, there certainly has been some development. Obviously, we still have a bone to pick with the illustrators and how they over-sexualize the female characters, but let's not get into that. It's a whole new conversation for a different day. Now, in a world where people aren't even ready to give equal representation to the other biological gender, how can we expect them to be considerate enough to include the wide range of sexualities? Well, some things will forever remain a mystery. But now, we're seeing more and more queer inclusivity in the media and entertainment platforms, and this improvement is being mirrored in the gaming industry as well. One of the biggest examples of this would be Life is Strange: True Colors. This is a video game based in a small town with a bisexual psychic as the main character. This video game came out almost a year ago, and since then has opened several avenues for diversity in the industry. Moving on, new games are doing amazing work for LGBTQ+ representation in the gaming world, but let's not forget the torchbearer. It's easy to give credit to the recently released games for paving a path for increased inclusivity, but it's important to note that The Sims walked so these new games could run. The Sims was first released in 2000 and is currently in its 4th edition, which took the world by a storm. It wasn't just the complete control players had over the characters that made it a favorite amongst all, but rather the fact that players could easily create characters that looked or behaved more like them. So, in a manner of speaking, the young queers living in the early 2000s were able to find acceptance in an online simulation where sexuality and gender were only a choice. Yikes! No wonder the game blew up the way it did. But here's something you need to know. It wasn't intentional. Now, this might confuse some of you, so let's start at the beginning. In the 90s, same-sex romantic interactions between game characters weren't exactly allowed. Well, that's not surprising. But a gay programmer, Patrick J. Barrett III, reinstated them because the documents he was using were actually outdated. What a happy mistake. This isn't all, dear viewers. Things get even more interesting. During a live demonstration of the gameplay in 1999, 2 female Sims began making out at a wedding which was completely off script. This happened in a room which was filled with journalists. So when the news got out, developers at Maxis were waiting for the higher-ups to demand a change. It never came, making Sims one of the first video gamers ever to allow homosexuality and bisexuality in their gameplay. And now, those of you who are familiar with the game would know that it's deliberately LGBTQ+ inclusive, which makes it all the more fun to play. All the characters until now were bisexual, but a recently introduced update allows you to define the character's sexual orientation. All this development in the gaming industry is probably owed to the fact that we now have gay people in positions of authority, just like in Sims. A person belonging to the LGBTQ+ community had the opportunity to make a difference and acted accordingly, which paved the way for future games as well. It's important to note that John Fussian, who is the associate producer at Maxis and also the Sims developer, is an openly gay man. This is clearly reflected in the direction taken by the game presently. And, of course, how can we forget about the Gay Awards? Okay, they aren't exactly called that, but maybe the execs should think about rebranding. The Gaming Awards awards for the first time took place in 2021. They were hosted by Gaming Magazine, with a panel of judges largely composed of people belonging to the LGBTQ+ community. The first ceremony had 150,000 viewers from around the world. This award ceremony is the first of its kind and gives queer people a platform of their own, so they won't get overshadowed by people filled with bias and prejudice. In 2022, this platform hosted its first ever global ceremony on Twitch with 320,000 viewers from almost 97 countries. Now, the success of such an initiative shows the importance of involving this huge demographic in the conversation. And we all know that representation in video games can lead to community development. Yes, that's right. Diversity in video games brings people together from all over the world. This becomes a driving factor of sorts, which makes underrepresented people feel heard. Of course, we're no longer living in the cave era, where the ability to procreate defined a human's value. As a society, we've advanced a lot, which has allowed for inclusivity and development in our personalities. Teens and young people nowadays get opportunities to be themselves that weren't there before. Many influencers and social media celebrities now feel more comfortable with coming out early to the public. This ends up making their fans feel like they too can overcome such obstacles. One of the famous Twitch streamers, Ben Ostwick, has come forward stating that queer representation in video games has allowed him to reach out to a larger audience, which makes him more influential, thus allowing him to have a say in the decision-making process, even if it's very small. So it's commonly accepted that such queer folks, if they're given the right sort of power, can actually make a whole lot of change in society, which, of course, would lead to a brighter and more colorful future. But we still have a long way to go. If you've ever been exposed to the unfiltered, explicit chat rooms in some violent video games, then you have all our sympathy. These chat rooms are filled with homophobic comments that make these spaces extremely unfriendly for the LGBTQ+ community. So even though we see a lot of development in the video games themselves, the attitudes of gamers still need to be changed largely. Many gamers often indulge in comments that are rather transphobic, homophobic, or spread bigotry. So steps must be taken to create a safe space for the queer community. These games provide an opportunity for young queer people to explore their identity in a safe space, but with such a negative attitude, it becomes really hard for them to indulge in such things. And sadly, most platforms don't really cater to the inclusive needs of such minorities, as they're afraid of receiving backlash from a larger community. So gamers and their representation in video games are larger than ever, but we've come to a conclusion that a lot more needs to be done in order to properly create a safe space for the LGBTQ+ community. That's a wrap for this video, guys. What do you think about this new rise of gamers? How do you think the industry can make them feel welcomed? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more awesome videos like this.